So this was one of my more whimsical recent eBay purchases. This is a single issue of the UK Transformers Generation 1 comic from about 26 years ago now. Have I done my maths right? 36 years ago? Oh god, yeah, it could be 36 years. We'll figure that out in a moment. But I already have collected versions of all these comics, and these are the Transformers comics that I grew up with here in the United Kingdom. A little bit of crossover with the US comics, but actually a different storyline, and one that is probably very familiar to anyone who is what I believe is termed a trans fan these days, because the British version of the comic was quite distinct. It had the same basic overall goal, obviously, of promoting the toys, but Simon Furman, of course, has gone on to do so much with the Transformers concept that it can't be overstated, really. And I thought it would be interesting just to see whether or not the reproduction of this strip is exactly the same as the original was. And the short answer is, I think it is and it isn't, which is quite nebulous, I know. But if you can see this page, I'm just opening it up to start you off with, because the actual size of the British comic is smaller than the reprint size. And just to give you an idea, this is a modern day US comic, and you can see how much smaller a US comic is as compared with the British comics from that day, which were effectively sort of a full A4 size kind of comic, but the US comics are always a little bit smaller. But the actual reprint version is slightly bigger again, which is quite curious. But you can see here there's more white space at the bottom of this page than there is on the original. But curiously, if you look at Jetfire's head here, and yes, it's Jetfire, not Skyfire, and then you compare it with the same panel here, it's had a bit chopped off, because for some reason, if I move this back, you can see there's more white at the bottom here than there is on this one. So they've kind of moved it down. In fact, no, I've got that back to front. Actually, they've actually truncated it for some reason. It's straight. It looks like that's right. Yeah, I think they've actually zoomed in a bit somehow. I'm not quite sure why, but can you see there's slightly more? There's more of a chunk of metal there than there is on the reprint version, and yet they've managed to cut a chunk of his head off there. So it's kind of odd in that sense. I mean, the reproduction's nice, obviously, because it's a much brighter, whiter page than this one. And I didn't get this. This isn't like a near mint version of the comic at all, but it's it's a good version of it. Which I probably paid over the odds for, knowing me, but not ridiculously. There was no actual other bidders, so I just got it for what it was on for, basically. But I'm going to take you through. I mean, I'll just mention this one because this is the version of the collected comics that I had, and I don't actually know if this is the current version of them, because I did notice on eBay just recently that there seemed to be a different version of the collected G1 comics. This was the Titan Books edition, and a terrific compilation of all the original UK comics. And also of all the US comics as well, so you can get both, and you follow them through. And it's also interesting because it's got this Cybertron, the middle years segment there in text is also in this issue. So they have obviously included some of the extras, but this just takes me right back to a sort of Saturday morning hunting around the comic stores on my bike trying to find these things. And as soon as I saw this cover, I thought, yep, I know exactly what's in this. Because even the covers were really, A, they were beautifully drawn, but B, they also often had these great little sort of taglines going on. And of course this one is terrific because Scourge is scrapped and not by an Autobot, which is interesting because Scourge is a Decepticon, so therefore logically another Decepticon is scrapping him. But who? anyone familiar will probably spot the weapon that's doing it as well, of course, know what the crack is, but other people may not do so much. So this was from 18th of October 86. So 14, 22, that's 36. Yeah, that's 36 years old. Number 83, 30 British pence. There you are. So I got one of the reasons I picked this issue as well was because it's art by Geoff Senior, and I love his artwork. It's brilliant. It's for some reason the styles always really appealed to me. He also did art for Dragon's Claws and Death's Head as well, which are also British Marvel series, which I absolutely loved. We'll just hit that sort of sweet spot in timing in terms of, you know, when I was getting comics back then. So each issue would sort of start off with a little sort of recap, as in here, contents page. There were always a few extra strips. It wasn't always just Transformers at all. So here we have Starscream actually is sort of waking up, and bizarrely he's on board the Ark of all places, because he's actually been fixed by the Autobots, which is a curious thing to say the least. But you know, they were annoyingly honourable like that. And this sort of quite sort of blocky, blocky's not the right word, but it's very sort of squared off kind of style of drawing is very much Geoff Senior's sort of tagline. But I want to show you a page which was I've always remembered because it was just nasty, but it was also beautifully realised because you could see exactly what they were going for when he drew it. So basically, that's nice old it's a nice old advert there for Galvatron. And yeah, that is Galvatron on the top right of that advert versus Ultra Magnus. I never had them because I didn't actually like the Ultra Magnus toy, and nor did I particularly like the Galvatron toy because they didn't look like they did in the comics, you see. And I was such a comics fan that I was just like, nah, I don't want those. Now, these days you could probably get them as, you know, one of these many sort of repro kind of versions, and I'm sure a lot of those repro versions, whilst they are immensely difficult to transform, do nevertheless end up looking more like the comics and sort of animated versions. Now, speaking of which, this storyline, Target 2006 in the British comics, actually falls kind of in the middle of Transformers the movie, which you may well be familiar with as an animated movie that basically ended the G1 era, give or take, in terms of the number of bots it actually killed off in order to allow new toys to come in. So what the UK very cleverly did was introduce a sort of a time travel story into the middle of their normal UK continuity, which linked into the movie, which was brilliantly, very cleverly done. And that had a lot of consequences then for in terms of the movie was the past. So the movie was set in the future as compared with the then current timeline, and so it all sorts of interlinks, but then the events of the movie still have an impact because Galvatron is still present with Megatron at the same time, so that causes all sorts of hilarities later. But in this particular issue, what's happened is that Optimus Prime is out of commission. Trying not to spoil it too much, but he's out of commission. So the Autobots are getting their heads handed to them repeatedly by Galvatron because he's overwhelmingly powerful, as are his lieutenants Scourge and Cyclonus. And the Autobots realise that the one chance they have of trying to overcome him is to team up with Megatron and Soundwave, who Galvatron had previously incapacitated in an earlier episode, in an earlier issue. So Megatron now leads a squad of Autobots against Scourge, who is out scouting for materials by himself, so he's isolated. And the hunt kind of goes pretty well for Scourge up to a point, but he realises that the Autobots have been organised, and he realises that really he needs to get out or pick them off one by one. And so he's lurking around this metal foundry trying to find a way out, and he comes across poor old Grapple here. And I love this page, and it's this page on the right that is just brilliant for me because he spots Grapple before Grapple spots him, and he grabs a sheet of metal off the shelf, and you can see in that top right frame, he just slings it, and you've got that sort of lovely classic Senior arc effect there, where you can see that his arms just sort of come from one side of his body round to the other and let it go in the middle, and it just goes straight into Grapple's chest, and that's like, oh, that's nasty, and it's this slish sound effect. But then even more so, then Scourge then manages to sort of break through the wall and just sort of gets outside, because he realises that he's lost his primary gun, so he needs to transform to be able to use his jet-based firepower. But unfortunately it goes badly for him, because one bot hasn't joined the fray inside, and that's Megatron. And the one thing that is going to shut Scourge up is Megatron's fusion cannon. And so it is that as soon as he's out in the open, Megatron takes him down with a single blast to the chest. And so it's a really sort of fascinating team up, because you never normally see, you know, any sort of team up between the Autobots and Decepticons for obvious reasons. But unusually here they have this antagonistic third party who, whilst he is nominally a Decepticon, is not acting in any of their interests from their point of view at this point in time. So it's a really interesting issue, and it ends with poor old Jazz sort of tied up and being subjected to Galvatron's whims there. And the big reveal at the end of this issue is that in fact Galvatron is Megatron, and that's the big reveal at the end of the issue there. So spoilers, but I'm guessing if you're looking at this and you're of a certain age and you already know what the plot line is. So also in this comic, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way is being advertised. You can, I don't know if it's still in print, maybe it is. It'd be a bit old school now, but you can see the old school of Marvel comic drawing there. Those are the sort of characters I remember from the late 80s. That's how they drew them back then. There's also this random Robo Capers strip as well, which is always around, one way or another. Now the other interesting thing in the back here, this is where we get into the more sort of text-based part of the comic. So we have sort of reader's page, which is Grimgrams, and yes, that is Grimlock right there. And that's very much a sort of a toy kind of, well, it's not really a toy styled Grimlock, but you can see it's, you know, it's designed to be quite close to the toy. We've got Cybertron in the middle years, which is, again, that's replicated in the collected version. But interestingly, we then get a strip for Hercules. Now, as I recall, a certain Marvel film has recently reintroduced him into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But here he is in the comics, and he was always around in this sort of era quite a lot. I don't know if he's been maintained since, but this is very much the sort of the Hercules that I was familiar with. And this is one of the Heralds of Galactus having it out with him. I'm not sure what her name is actually. And he's also got a recorder unit with him, which looks for all the world like a Machine Man of this particular era, because Machine Man was once a backup comic in a backup strip in the Transformers comic as well. So it's a really interesting little sort of snippet of comic book history, because of course those were probably American strips. They weren't, the Hercules wouldn't have been, I'm saying that, I don't think Hercules was actually British created. And there we've got a nice little sort of coupon which you can give to your newsagent if you want to reserve a copy. And it also gives you a sort of what's coming next. So you can see here that the triple changes are going to be in the next issue. So it's it was really well put together. It never condescended. It didn't treat you like a child at all, which is really interesting, because I'm not really sure what age range they were aiming at. But I just thought that was a really nice one to look at, as it, you know, as I originally had it in my hands, because unfortunately my collection of single issues has long since gone. But I did collect them for a long time, and I was quite early to it as well. In fact, I found out the other day that there was an episode in the comics that I remembered very clearly, which wasn't reproduced in the collected versions, because apparently I think Simon Furman didn't like it as a storyline, so it didn't get reproduced. So it's like sort of, did I imagine that, or did that actually happen? It did actually happen. It's just not in my collected editions. So it's a strange thing, but there you go. So yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that little bite of Transformers nostalgia. But this is this, from my point of view, is very much sort of, you know, where it all began, and I did keep collecting them for quite a while. I mean, you know, they went on for, it was a long run. But obviously, eventually, those sort of, that original line of toys kind of faded, and then, but then of course we ended up with things like Beast Wars, which again Furman was involved with the animation of, and it was in keeping with this G1 continuity, which was brilliant. So he's stitched the whole thing together for years and years. So you know, credit where credit's due. I think if not for him, those of us who were, you know, who cared about such things, were really appreciative of the fact that the universe was really sort of coherent and made sense. And, you know, obviously if you wanted to use your toys to play along with it, then great, that kept Hasbro happy. But actually, they were just being as creative as they wanted to be, I think, past a certain point, which was great. So yeah, so that was that. So that's a Marvel UK Transformers comic for discussion. Thanks very much. Cheers for now.